Hello and welcome to Crafty Magic Arts and my very first YouTube video. Today I'm going to take this beautiful Frankie Stein doll and I'm going to make her into a new work of art. She's actually in pretty good condition. I found her without a hand and that inspired me to make a unique piece of work. Before going any further, let's talk about what I'm actually making here. I'm making this based off the Venus De Milo by Alexandros of Antioch. I absolutely love this piece. It is absolutely stunning, and her already having a missing hand was the perfect base for it. I'm using this 3D turnaround that I actually found on a 3D printing site, and it's perfect as a point of reference. Before we can get going, I do need to make some corrections to her body. Monster-High dolls, while beautiful, do have a really strong arch to their body, and I decided to experiment with a heat gun. So if you take the heat gun and you apply it right to the hard plastic, you can actually melt it, but be aware it also melts their hair. You saw that actually happen in real time just now. So I have this silicone finger nubbin that I wear, and I can use it to actually press on the very, very hot plastic. And I'm actually able to reshape it. You can see it there. I actually do this to her foot later on. I don't actually get a video of that. It takes you'll see it later, like much later. But yeah, the heat gun is a good source of reshaping the body. It does make it really wonky though, so you have to be prepared to use like epoxy sculpt. Here I'm actually removing her hair. I have no intention of having rooted hair or any kind of hair. Usually I do use fibers, but in this case I'm not. Gotta get it right out of there. I'm taking the heat gun again to make her vinyl head soft enough to remove from the hard plastic body. I don't recommend actually using a heat gun. I probably would use like a hairdryer or warm water. The reason why is it actually does melt the the remaining hair, and it made them like plugs to get off. Here you can see she's all prepared and ready to go, and I have my references printed out so I have them ready and nearby. Alright, now we're on to making the base. It doesn't seem like the next logical step, but it was because I need to make sure she was in a stable spot before I could proceed. I plan on making her a pose doll and not able to move anymore, more like a sculpture. You can see here I filled it with rocks. This is actually a recycled towel hanger base thing, and I filled it with rocks and then filled the rocks with hot glue to make sure they didn't move. I have the silicone mat that I actually got from the dollar store, which works amazingly, so highly recommend in that case. As you can see here, I continue to use the mat to flatten the glue and squish it all into the rocks. Overall it works really well, and then I'm able to move on to cleanup and removing the excess glue that poured over with a knife or a craft blade. Here I'm using my small bolt cutters, and they are cutting a screw or a bolt. If I would have known, I wouldn't have cut it where I did because I actually don't need the full length, but that's okay. Here I'm using my drill to get through the foot. I have actually never worked with Monster-High dolls before, and I will tell you that their plastic is hard, and the foot is still not flat at this point. I planned on keeping it angled. And it would have been so much easier if I had actually flattened the foot at this point, but I didn't, so I had to use various techniques to get in there. I'd use my hand drill, I'd use my power drill, knives, and even the tip of my hot glue gun. It was very dramatic, but eventually I did get the bolt into the foot to make it there, but then I had to shorten it, like I said, so I didn't need the full length of the bolt, but that's okay. I will save all the pieces for other projects. I don't like wasting. Yeah, and now she can be stood on her base, which is nice and heavy and ready to go. Now, it is unfortunate she did have to lose perfectly good limbs, one arm and then part of another. I had to cut it off with this little saw. Not recommended. I will find a better way to do it next time. But I did saw it off and get it ready for the next piece. So as I said before, she is going to be a posed doll or work of art. I have no intention of her moving around, so I am using my super glue. I really do like Gorilla Glue. I've had really good experience with it. However, it doesn't last if you are maneuvering the piece at all. It did break a few times and I had to reassemble it. So here now I'm finally pulling out my epoxy sculpt. This is highly recommended for most doll customizers, to be honest. It's just incredible. I use it for all my toy customs. I do a lot of those. And I need to do a lot of changes to the body. So I have my reference now in a plastic sleeve ready to go so I can actually reference it and go ahead with the sculpting. The nice thing about epoxy sculpt is actually it does cure. If you haven't heard about it, It's air dry, but not air dry in the same sense that you're used to. It does, like I said, it cures. So you do have a working time. You can add water to smooth it, but it doesn't stop the curing process. Once the two pieces are together, it will go ahead. It takes about 24 hours for a full cure, but usually it's hard enough to continue working after about 6. I love working with it. You have to be mentally prepared to really sit down and use it. Wear gloves. It's a good idea. Have water handy so you can do smoothing and get it ready to go. Now, this is actually 10 times sped up. And looks like I'm going record fast. I'm not. It took a long time and a lot of layers, but what I did, a big mistake here, was I decided to add epoxy on both front and back. I thought I get it done. I had extra. Why not? Don't do this. Don't be me. Don't be me. Do the front first and then the back later. I smushed either side repeatedly. I had to rework it over and over and over again. It was a big old pain in the butt. So yeah, yay. Hey, and speaking of butt, sorry, that was terrible. Yeah, she had to get a new booty. She had to get more hips. All of her joints were filled in, so they were not obviously a doll anymore. Not obviously looking a doll. She's obviously still a doll. And I had to get it all done. As I said, I'm working on front and back visibly here. Don't do this. But at the same time, it ended up turning out quite nicely, but it did take multiple passes, which I don't have them all here. You would be watching me sculpt for probably 40 minutes, and that's sped up. But here you can see the body is mostly done. I'm quite pleased with how it looks, including the shoulders and the arms and the hips and even the knees. Now I'm moving on to her hair. Like I said, I had no intention of actually having real hair, but I do have to sculpt hair. So it looks more like a stone sculpture. So this actually took quite a bit of effort to make it look good and a few passes. I couldn't just do it all in one go. I would say I probably had to do it at 4 passes. Yeah, at least 4, because I didn't want to smush the work I had already done. So this is probably second or third pass at this point, because I had to do the front and then I had to do the top of the head and then I had to do the side and back. And yeah, I had to like really work it in there, smooth it out, lots of water. You can actually see my gloves are really white, and that's because I actually reuse them. When I'm epoxy sculpting, I can reuse my gloves. There's no point wasting. So you'll see these gross, disgusting gloves remain. And here I'm using aluminum foil to make her bun at the back of her hair. I didn't want to waste a ton of epoxy sculpt. It also adds a ton of extra weight. Epoxy sculpt is quite heavy. So I did that instead, where I actually used aluminum foil and then covered it in epoxy sculpt so that I could have the bun be less epoxy, less heavy, and still be proper. And then I'm just finishing it up. And here we go. Everything is pretty much fully sculpted. I don't go back to epoxy sculpt after this point. I have it to a point where I'm really happy with how it looks and how everything's come together. I didn't worry too much about the legs and building it out because that'll be covered. But yeah, you can see here I got the nose done. I didn't actually show that. I got the hair mostly done. More to come on that. And even the back of the hair. Yeah, she looks really good. Oh, now the modeling pace. This is actually an impulse buy. I bought this stuff when I was at the art store. We have a beautiful art store here where I live, and it was literally on a table right before checkout, and I looked at it and asked if it could be sanded. And they said, yeah, as long as you wear a mask. And I said, sure. So now what I do here is I actually add texture to the hair without actually having to use epoxy sculpt. So this stuff is awesome. It dries really fast, and you can use it and model with it and have fun. I usually actually use it for smoothing out areas on epoxy sculpt, so it's easier to sand. So if I have like a weird divot, which is really hard to get out with epoxy sculpt, I'll actually put a layer of this stuff on, let it dry. It's kind of like drywall compound. Let it dry and then sand it, and actually smooths out any ridges or bumps if it's anything like that. So I've used this before. So for the hair, I want it to look like it was sculpted, much similar to the beautiful work of art that is the Venus de Milo, and I actually sculpt using this stuff. I highly recommend. Here I did have to sand it. I am wearing a mask when I sand epoxy sculpt. You don't want this stuff in your lungs. I actually would like to have a sanding station with like a vacuum set up eventually, but right now I don't have that. But for now, this worked really well. All right, as you saw, I did pull out fabric, and that was just to be dramatic and let you guys see it. I'm not doing anything with it yet, but I added my modeling compound and a ton of glue. I have some matte medium as well to thin it out. And what I'm doing is I'm actually creating a paste so I can dip the fabric in so it can be kind of thicker. Now, I re-added tons of product throughout to make it the right consistency. At that point, it probably wasn't the right consistency. But here I'm actually doing a test piece right before bed to make sure that the next day I could see what it actually would look like. Turned out, so now I moved on. Oh, there's the foot. It's nice and flat now and sculpted quite well. It actually worked out quite well. I used the same technique as the body. Highly recommend. So here it is. I have it ready to go. It is thicker, and I'm shoving the fabric in there. Now this fabric did have quite a bit of texture. It was the only fabric that I really had that would work. I end up having to fill it up quite a bit to make sure I remove the texture. But that's at a later time. So here I am layering it onto the body. So I had no intention of sculpting the actual fabric. I actually did this technique with another piece that hopefully one day I'll show you, where I actually use real fabric and just form it. The nice thing about this technique is that you don't actually have to worry about the folds looking right because it's fabric. They're folding correctly for the most part. However, it was nearly impossible to get the really tight folds and wrinkles that were up near the top, like near the hips, as well as throughout like the center of the folds. And so what I had to do was actually had to use tissue paper. I tried actually using Kleenex and that just melted away. Don't do that. Tissue paper actually worked beautifully. It does take quite a bit to make it look seamless because the tissue paper doesn't have that same texture like I mentioned before. So yeah, as you can see here, I'm actually covering it now with, it's not the same stuff. I don't actually show me mixing this, but it's actually a technique I picked up from some miniature artists. I think Black Magic Craft was the one I heard it from, where they actually mix acrylic paint with Mod Podge. I did something similar, but instead I used my acrylic gesso and I mixed it with Mod Podge. It's actually white base versus the black that they commonly use. So this gives me a really tight hold. I'm using, I believe, matte Mod Podge and my gesso, and it works really well. But it's not how I paint it. It's just how I get the first real pass, and then I actually cover it with acrylic paint after. So you can see here, there is still some texture, but for the most part, my layers upon layers of paint and modeling compound and glue does cover most of the texture. Here I'm pouring in my acrylic paint, which I watered down significantly because it was the very last remnants of it, and I just needed that anyways to be really watery, so I thought, why not? And here I'm mixing a bunch of colors. I decided to go for more the classic stone look rather than the more pure white aesthetic. It's actually closer to what looked like the 3D model than the actual picture that I took from the museum that I used as reference. So here the piece is already painted white, so now I'm going to kind of do a type of wash. Now this wash was efficient on white. It just got right in there and stained it very thoroughly. It actually looked really well, but I did have to wipe it off. I didn't want it pooling. I didn't want it like obvious, and I wanted some of the white to show through. Doesn't really, and I do have to come back later, but I'm quite pleased with how well it ended up turning out because I was able to really get into the cracks without adding tons of extra layers of paint. I've already done lots of layers of paint, and I'm going to lose all my detail work that I have if I continue to layer on thick paint. So this was a really good technique to allow me to still have the color without having to add on too much layers of paint. I go throughout the entire body with this. I want to cover it, but I do want to start adding shadows. Again, I don't want to add a ton of extra layers of paint. So what I do here is I actually take out my soft pastels, I scratch them into another container, and I mix the colors together. It took me about 10 passes of the colors to make the right color. I can't tell you the ratios. It's just whatever worked and what I felt looked great. And I will say that this worked really well and was very thorough, and I do recommend it. But after you work with soft pastels, make sure you are prepared to spray your piece, just so you don't spread the pigment past where you want it. After I sprayed the piece, I did actually go back in with paint, and then I'm not worrying about spreading the pigment around. For my spray varnish, I usually use Rust-Oleum Chalked Matte Clear varnish. It works really well. So I continue on with the different piece, and you'll notice here that I'm actually using the makeup brush. This is a cheapie that I got from the dollar store. It works really well. I don't need to worry about touching the pigment. You don't want to touch it with your fingers once you've applied it because it actually will smear it. It'll like apply it thicker. So you don't want to do that. The makeup brush allows me to collect the pigments, put it back in the container, and then also ensure that it's going in the right spots. So I do it everywhere. I do it on the hair, I do it on the face, I do it on the folds of the fabric. It gets me the darker shadows darker. So it looks more accurate to what I'm looking for. So here it is after the pass, and it's ready to go. I believe I've already sprayed it at this point. Here, I really want to get a close up and let you see all the work I've done at this point. She looks quite pretty. Oh, you probably noticed I got a different camera angle. Yes, during this whole process, I also decided that I needed a new camera angle. The angle I had before, I was often blocking it. You guys don't see that because I cut all those clips out, but believe me, I block a lot of stuff. And I feel that if I'm going to start doing this at all, I want to have a good space. Here I'm dry brushing some lighter colors onto the model. Now, it is what it is. There's nothing really to show here. You can't actually see a lot of changes. It doesn't really capture on camera. And even in the model itself, it's not a significant difference because the piece was quite light already. But it is the subtle things. Like, it's a subtle change. And that subtle change does bring out the highlights, and the lowlights are more noticeable if you do that. So this is not, again, not pure white. This is a mixture of the white, the black, the blue, the tan, to make sure that I do have the right colors. I don't want it to be too bright. So I'm really focused on just getting the high areas, like the cheekbones and the top of the head and the top of the bosom and the top of the butt, and making it look really nice throughout with little subtle changes here and there. I'm sometimes wiping the pigment away because I added it a little too much. It's getting too thick. So it's small. It's just repeating until you get the right look. It's all about making it look good as much as you can. One thing that's worth noting is that you can see here that I am creating a custom, but it's not my first one. I've created many of these, and this is my first time ever showing it here on this medium of YouTube. If you're interested in seeing them, the other ones I've created, please let me know. I'm thinking of creating like a series called Throwback Thursday, where I actually go through some of my older creations and like review them with you guys. I'd love to share that with you. What do you think? Continuing on here, I now need to finish this piece up. I need to sign the piece. I'm ready for that now. I'm using a Posca pen. It splattered because it kept catching, but it ended up turning out okay. I mean, I used blue because I thought it looked good. Also, I couldn't find my black, but I like blue. It's pretty. So now I need to cover the piece. Also, I need to cover with Mod Podge. I've never actually used this hard coat Mod Podge before. So this is actually a brand new container. I saw it when I was shopping and I was like, oh, this will be perfect. So I took it and I was like, but I need to test it first. So you can see here I struggled opening it, and of course I left it all gross and gunky because that's how I do. And now I'm going to test it. So I originally tested a little bit on the bottom. Okay, let's see how this looks. The thing is, it's not actually accurate because it's not the color. So I did move it to the back where the folds are. I figured if anything's going to mess up, the very back bottom wouldn't be that big of a deal. So I added the hard coat on it, and then I had to get it dry. So I do bring back my heat gun, but as you can see, I'm moving my hand around a lot, and that's so the heat doesn't remain in one place for very long, because you don't want anything melting, because it will cause bubbles to form. I've actually had that happen before. But I blast it a few times, make sure it's dry, and then I actually give it a good look, make sure that yes, the hard coat looks good and it's not going to wreck the piece or the aesthetic I'm looking for. Actually, it's quite nice. It doesn't say matte, but it's quite matte, and I really like how it actually ended up looking. So now that I know that it's going to look fine, I move on to covering the whole piece. So I go full go on this. I should have probably taken a couple passes, like let the body dry and then do the head, but I just went for it. I went from bottom to top. The key thing about any kind of like putting on any kind of coverage or coat like this is that you have to make sure it's thin. You don't want it to pool, because then you will actually get cloudy areas. So I like to really take my time, brush over the piece, and make sure that it looks as clear as possible when it's in this form. I know that it's like essentially a white glue, but you want it to get as clear as possible. Here I'm actually blasting it with a heat gun again because I do want to make sure it looks good and ready to go. But now I need to move on to the next piece. Now that it's dry, I'm going to grab some felt. I keep all my scraps, so I'm going through my scrap bin here and I'm finding a color that will work. I'm debating on the two, whether I want white or cream, but I decide to eventually go with white. But I do continue to look through the rest of the bin just to see if there's anything else. But here you are. I selected white. Pretty basic. I was hoping for kind of like a light gray, but I couldn't find anything like that in my collection, and I didn't want to cut up a fresh piece if I did happen to have it, which I didn't even look, to be honest. So here I am, I'm cutting out the piece. I'm getting ready to cut it out actually. So I take a Sharpie and I mark around it. It's a little wide on purpose because I want it to be past the edge so I can trim it later. And it's better that way. So you can see it's still a little damp actually. I rushed it a little bit, but that's okay. It doesn't affect the fabric. I take my fabric scissors, I cut it out. Now, if you don't have fabric scissors, invest in them. I actually got these from my Oma. I got her whole sewing kit, kind of inherited it. And I'm not a big sewer, but I was so grateful of all the extra stuff that I ended up getting to add to my craft collection, including these awesome fabric scissors. Like, you don't know the difference until you try to cut with regular craft scissors and then you cut with fabric scissors. I've done it before where I've put the felt on the bottom of my piece and then cut out the felt afterwards where my signature is, but this time I did decide to prep it in advance and I think it was a really good call. So here I am cutting out the hole that I need in order to actually see the signature. Again, with my lovely fabric scissors, not craft scissors. Craft fabric. You want fabric scissors. And it lines up beautifully, perfect, getting ready for the next piece, which will be gluing. I bust on my hot glue gun. Now here you can see that it's actually got a switch on it. That's not the on and off switch. It looks like it because it actually has the on off symbol on it. It's misleading. As soon as it's turned on, it will be green if it's flipped in the up direction, or it'll be red if it's flipped or down direction, and flipped red if it's at the up direction. The reason why is it's actually got two modes. It can either be low heat or high heat. Low heat's really great for basic crafting. I do that with my kids, so I don't burn myself as badly, but you want high heat if you want things to actually stay stuck for a very long time. A lot of people make the mistake of using just basic craft low heat glue guns on a lot of their pieces, and what ends up happening is it falls apart because it doesn't have the adhesion. It's great for when you're like gluing foam together. You want low heat for that because it melts it otherwise. But yeah, you wanna go for the ones that can do both. And here you can see that I am now trimming the excess. I actually use these little like thread scissors. These work really well. They're not as sharp as my big ones, but they work pretty well. I use them for when areas that had the glue kind of coming out. I didn't want to damage my fabric scissors, so I used it in that way. And yeah, it looks pretty good. It's a good way to trim it out. I also use the thread scissors for getting into like those narrow spots that are a little harder to get to. So I use that and actually glue the pieces down in areas that weren't quite as adhered. So here I am cleaning up the edges. I want to make sure that it looks really clean. It looks really nice because when you have the piece on the shelf, you don't want to see like this big gross fluff tuff poking out from the bottom of it. So overall, it looks really good. I'm really pleased with the bottom. I know no one's going to really look there, but it is important for me. I think that marking your pieces is really important with your signature, as it shows you did it. And I did. Here's my final piece, the Venus De Milo. Overall, I'm very happy with how she came out. I think she's quite beautiful. I think she matches what I envisioned the whole time. Thank you for making it this far. Thank you for coming all this way and bearing with my awkward camera motions and my cuts and my edits. This is my first time using Adobe Premiere in a long time. I'm using the Elements version, which I do like. So if you really do like my work, please like and subscribe. I am planning on putting more content out there for you guys, including some of my other work, so maybe a Throwback Thursday type situation. But let me know if you like it by liking and subscribing. Thanks and have a great day. Bye.